Humanities at Ca' Foscari University in Venice, and she has been working in the last years on the main issue basically we have to deal with, which is fake news from the perspective of a very influential data scientist. Obviously, COVID-19 outbreak and the so-called infodemia actually are the new. I mean, the last practical problem Fabiana is working on also at the level of European projects. So thank you for being with us, Fabiana, and the floor is yours. Take the time you need.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. Today I know that you had a previous seminar by Walter Quattrociocchi. So I worked with Walter in the last 5 years, 6 years now. So I will try not to overlap with his seminar too. But the idea of this seminar today is to tell you what we are doing more on the communication side, and so why we started focusing on these issues. So since I will mainly refer to the social media environment and in general to the digital information space, I just wanted to point out the 3 main characteristics of this information space. The first one is that we have lots of information which is going around, and so we have. We are on one side, we as users using the devices and all. The social media platforms, we are producing data. So this is something that we can use and we can leverage the availability of this data to investigate online phenomena. But on the other side, all this information is information that we as human beings have to process when we are online. We have lots of information, and we have information that may spread very easily and very rapidly online because of the structure itself of this space. On the other side, we have another important characteristic of this space, and because we observed a shift of paradigm from the traditional media system to the new media environment, where we have a heterogeneous set of information sources, and these sources are sometimes alternative and were born as alternative to traditional media. Users online can rely and can access a variety of information, and sometimes this information can also be unreliable. So we have lots of information that can spread very easily, and lots of alternative news sources. But in the end, as I was mentioning, we are human beings and our attention is limited. So also some cognitive biases that such, for example, the confirmation bias, so the bias for which we tend to select information, to process information in a way which is current with our system of beliefs. These biases play an important role in how we process information online, and we select information, and we choose also the groups of people and the category of sources where we get informed. We studied all these aspects, and I am sure that using a new approach. So using the idea here is that we are trying to answer research questions that are we can say from the social sciences, but we are using quantitative methods to address these research questions, quantitative methods from the computer science, from statistics, from mathematics. And what we did, I'm sure that Walter already mentioned this. So we measured and we identified echo chambers quantitatively in social media, and we analyzed the interaction of also between opposite groups and with different narratives on social media, and we observed a very strong polarization, which can be observed any time we have a very controversial issue, or for example, with politics or pseudoscience, or this kind of topics. And what we also observed was that when you try to correct information, this correction may result in a backfire effect. So may backfire and may reinforce the original opinions of users instead of correcting that information. Of course, backfire was something that, you know, was already well known, but what we did was to measure quantitatively this effect online for in this case for Facebook, and we observed more in general that the polarization that I was mentioning is something that you can observe in general in the way in which we process information. In this case, this work was analyzing how users interact with English news on Facebook in a data set over a time span of 6 years, and we had more than 376 million users here. And what we observed in the end was that you can observe 5 main communities, so 5 main, you know, set of news sources the users are relying for their news consumption. This is important also because we also observe that the number of news sources a user is interacting is also reducing when their lifetime or their activity on the platform is increasing. So this, of course, can be an issue because can reduce, you know, the pluralism, for example, in a democracy, because potentially using the internet and social media, we can access, you know, an infinite, I would say, amount of information. But if in the end we just, you know, focus on a very specific set of pages, and so on a very specific set of news sources, we are limiting in the end our capacity to interact with plural information sources. So as I was saying, this work had some impact, especially on the debunking approach. So the fact that, you know, you provide content to correct let's say false information or misleading information. The Washington Post decided to close their weekly column devoted to the debunking. But the idea so is that, and that's what I want to focus today in this talk. So what we can do then? So if, for example, debunking activities may not you know, be effective, so how we can contrast misinformation. So so the first idea and what I will talk about some of the projects I've been working on in the last year and in the last years, and I will also show you the starting point of this project. So what we observed was that analyzing the data, we observed that there is, let's say, sort of temporal window of 24 hours between the appearance, the first appearance of a certain topic on official news sources and consequent first appearance on fake news. So there is, this 24 hours of temporal window that one can have to, let's say, prevent the appearance of fake news on a specific topic. And what we also observed was that misinformation and polarization are linked to one another. So most of the times misinformation leverage some polarization dynamics. And so what we tried to do was to try to understand if we can use this information to predict, to be able to predict the future, possible future topics of fake news. So what we did in this work was indeed to analyze, so to use the way in which users online are interacting with content. So in terms, for example, of the sentiment of engagement, and also the way in which a content is presented to the audience. And we used all these measures and metrics to define some features to use in a machine learning system, where we analyze all this information and we are able to, let's say, predict possible topics of that will appear on fake news in the short time. So it's a sort of early warning system. Okay, so the idea here is that we are trying to do something before misinformation appears, because we can be able of understand where misinformation is likely to focus in the short time. And if we have, imagine to have a system like this, for example, running in real time, where you can issue an early warning and say to the communicator, to the journalist, look, this topic is pretty sensitive and it's likely to be a subject of a fake news pieces in the short time. Maybe you can adapt your communication strategy around this topic so that you try to, smooth polarization around the topic and limit the spread of misinformation on this topic. So this was the idea from this work, and this is what we have been trying to do in the last years. So to understand how, what we can do and how a communication strategy can be adapted to smooth polarization and to, so limit this kind of phenomena. So what we did, what I will present today is this project that we did in Italy with Corriere della Sera, which is the main newspaper that we have in Italy. And what we did together with the journalist and with the London School of Economics was to try to understand how the way in which you are presenting the news in terms of content type or technique can have, an impact on how readers are reacting to that particular piece of news. So we analyzed the data from Facebook and Twitter, and now I will explain more in detail what we did. For this specific project, we focused on the topic of migration. So migration in Italy was a pretty hot topic in the news agenda, interestingly also the topic was the content on migration in news was increasing, although we didn't have really an emergency on migration. And for example, the number of arrivals was reducing in those years, but the issue was stopping newspapers' agenda also because was pushed by some political parties in Italy and from the Ministry of Interiors in that time. So it was really interesting as a topic because it was on one side very controversial and a very dividing, let's say, topic. And on the other side, it was, the top issues for the news, for the journalists to work on. And we were also observing that the content of migration was getting a higher engagement with respect to all the other articles, so the other topics on the Corriere's Facebook page. So there was also, a very we could observe the presence of a interested debate, also from the public around the topic. What we also did was to analyze the echo chambers. How users were getting informed on migration on Twitter. And what you can observe is that before, so in May of 2018, we could observe three main communities in Italy. One was what we can call the mainstream community. Then we had the 5-star movement, which we can identify as the populist party, and then we have the right. So we could observe these three communities. But in June 2018, we had a coalition government in Italy between the right and the 5-star movement. So interesting. This is very interesting for us because it's usually these communities over time are pretty stable, but in this specific case, soon after the formation of this coalition government, the communities changed and became two. So what you can observe on the right is that we had after this coalition government, we could observe two main communities, the mainstream one and what we can call the alternative media. So this is interesting to observe because it means that, then users after the formation of this government, of this new government, were also looking for information and getting informed on a wider set of news sources that in some sense was in line what was happening at the government side. So what we did in the project, every time that, so in this period from March to November 2018, every time that Corriere della Sera had to publish news on the topic of migration, the journalists tried to use a variety of content types and techniques. So for example, so you want to tell a news and maybe you can choose to write a simple, standard article, or you can use infographics, or you can use multimedia content, or you can decide to write a news report or to write an editorial, human interest stories where you are telling, for example, the story of the migrant, of the group of migrants, so why they came to Italy, what kind of, for example, difficulties they had to deal with to reach our country, and so on. And what we did was to analyze the reaction, let's say, of users to this content and the sentiment of the comments of the users, so the emotional, let's say, attitude that the users were showing when commenting. And we also hired a group of external annotators, so to manually annotate more than 26,000 comments to assign 3 labels. So to understand if the comment was toxic, so in some sense it was using, some very aggressive, rude language. If there was a direct attack in the comment towards the source of information, so in our case, Corriere della Sera, and the position on the topic of migration. So if the person was in favor or against the migration phenomenon in Italy. So the first one is, a label as a sort of proxy for civil discourse. The second one is a proxy for trust, and the third one is our proxy for polarization, so that we could, try to understand if the different techniques were impacting these three levels. So what we observed was that, for example, multimedia pieces, and in general, every time that there were, images and especially videos, were getting a very strong and supporting engagement from the readers, and very low levels of criticism of the media. So so it seems that in those particular cases, the readers were trusting the news source. But any time that there were content types pushing facts to the forefront, like, for example, infographics, general data-driven content, and so on, there was lots of debate and discussion going on, and we observed a pushback from the anti-migration voices, who were so who were, let's say, refusing the data that the news source was providing, and high criticism of the media. So there was, we can see that there was less trust in this particular case, and in general, the news reports, which we can say can appear, more impartial, unemotional, where the pieces that elicited the most trust from the readers, but the human interest stories that so as I said, were stories about, the story of the single or the groups of migrants. So where these kind of stories were really designed by the journalist, as a way to sort of also create empathy with the migrants, to let the readers understand more in depth the reasons why people are, sometimes forced to leave their country. But in this, in our from our data and from what we can analyze, these stories got a very strong pushback from the audience, and we had lots of anti-migration comments, many toxic comments. So there was not really, a civil debate going around these kind of articles. Lots of criticism towards Corriere della Sera. In general, any time that the journalists were using and were proposing a piece of news, for example, constructive journalism, where they were providing also possible solutions to the problems, or very, the editorials, so very strong opinions. In all these situations, we had lots of criticism of the news source. So this was, an interesting project for many reasons. I would say mainly because we as researchers who could work together side by side, day by day, with journalists. So, and it was interesting to analyze this data and to get these insights from the project. Of course, this is on a very specific topic, which is migration, and in Italy with a very specific newspaper. But we believe that these insights, may be interesting in general to understand also how, the way in which, not what you are communicating, but the way in which you are choosing to present that content can impact the way in which the debate gets formed around the topic. So speaking of communication strategies, what I am also doing is that, so I am leading in Venice for Ca' Foscari, this European project, which is called Quest. Quest is a project on science communication, and so the overall objective of the project is to analyze the, let's say, state of the art of science communication in Europe, and to identify ways to improve science communication. What we did was to I mainly focused on the social media side, and so we analyzed lots of data on different platforms in Europe, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And we analyzed all the situation for 7 different countries for science communication. And if you're interested in this kind of information, there is the final report, which is publicly available on the website of the project. What we also did in the project was that, so we analyzed all this data, and we also had workshops and other kind of activities around Europe to identify what we can call the quality indicators for science communication. So what are, the what makes a communication of quality, and what different aspects one has to care about if they want to create a quality content. What we did was to put together these qualitative insights from workshops and other co-design activities, and the quantitative data that we had observing what was going on social media, to produce some tips and suggestions for improving the communication of science on social media. But we did this, so what we did was to create this, let's say, a sort of guidelines, but we don't like to call them guidelines because they're not really guidelines. They're some like of, leading principles of suggestions, to improve the quality of communication. And what we did was, so we used the data, we used the qualitative insights, we produced these recommendations, and we tested these recommendations with a set of communicators for 6-7 months on social media. And we listened to their feedback, and we also analyzed the data. So in the end, we refined these suggestions, which are now available in this graphical form for now on the website. And so we identified, these good practices for communicating science on social media. And in the end, we are also analyzed the impact of these recommendations for these accounts. And what I can say is that in the end, the impact is positive. So the idea of this experiment was, on one side, you want to maintain high quality of your content, but on the other side, you also want to make sure that this high quality content is reaching the target and is engaging with the users on social media. And this was the main basis of the experiment, and the results are really promising in this way. So there is a way to produce quality content on social media, and at the same time to have high engagement, and so to engage positively with the audience on the other side. The last project I just want to mention is another European project on hate speech, where we are, from a technical point of view, we are developing machine learning solutions to detect hate speech in several languages. And what we are doing now is that we are analyzing data to understand if there is, and we can observe for example, a relationship between hate speech and misinformation, and also understand and study over time the evolution and trends of hate speech on social media. And the final aim of this project, that will last 2 years and will end next year, is to, in the end, propose policy recommendations to the European regulators, and to recommend effective counter narratives against hate speech. So, and since Andrea was mentioning this at the beginning, we are also now dealing a lot with the COVID-19 situation. We analyzed the infodemic on social media last year, and so it's, we analyzed the infodemic in a way which can be, parallel to the way in which you can analyze the epidemic. So we I guess it's not for me.
Sorry, someone has the.
Okay.
I will try.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, so we analyzed the infodemic computing the R0 number for the infodemic, and we observed that indeed all these numbers were, hypercritical for all the social media platforms that we were observing. So in this case, we had Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, and Gab. And the interesting also result from this work was also that we analyzed the patterns of diffusion of reliable and unreliable information. And so what we can, you can simplify something like, fake news and general news. And what we observed was that indeed we couldn't observe differences in the way in which fake news spread with respect to their, reliable counterpart. And now we are still working on this, and I am involved in a couple of Italian task forces on COVID-19 and disinformation with the Italian Authority for Communication Guarantees, and with the presidency of the Council of Ministers, this what just want to tell you that indeed the idea is that data and also data-driven recommendations and solutions can be useful to tackle complex issues, and so also this kind of co-design and projects where researchers can work with the data and side by side with communicators involved in their daily time with the issue can be really interesting, motivating, and can give us, interesting results in the end, also to deal with the broader phenomenon of misinformation. And I am done.
Grazie Fabiana. Thank you very much for the presentation. I would have lots of questions, but maybe we will have another chance. So just a short comment. I have to say this is really the multidisciplinary approach really at its best. The idea is to put, to put to the empirical test theories or research questions coming from social studies, from media studies. And for instance, the idea is to detect where fake news are expected to spread, and then it's time for journalists to decide what to do. I have some question about this, but I would listen, Fernanda, to our Libyan friends, I guess.
Yeah, there's a question from Abdallah Al-Gamoudi, who asks, why did you choose migration as an example for misinformation?
Well, migration is not an example of misinformation. It's an example of a very polarizing issue, and we were looking for a controversial issue because, as I said, since lots of the times polarization and misinformation are linked together, the idea of the project was try to understand if we can improve the quality of the debate around a controversial issue like migration, so that you can, limit the polarization around that issue. And so we also expect to limit the misinformation around that issue, because it's not, let's say, interesting or catchy for misinformation to work on. So the idea is the idea of this project was to try to deal with misinformation, not directly with this information, but to improve the quality of information ecosystem, so that we can try, to insert quality information in the system and to maybe limit the need for readers to reach for other sources, for alternative sources.
Yeah, I have to say, in all European countries before COVID-19, migration was maybe the single most polarizing issue. This is something we are used to.
Yeah, also, I mean, in that project, as I said, it was a very hot topic in Italy when we started the project. So it was sort of a natural choice, but there was also, a practical reason. So we had to choose a topic where, the journalists were sure that they had something to talk about, because since it was a hot topic, we were pretty sure that in the following months they would have produced news on that particular topic, because of course it had to be for them also, interesting for them to talk about this kind of issues. But I have to say that the topic was mainly chosen by the journalists, not from us. So it was their choice in the end.
I have a question myself, can I?
Sure.
Yeah, when you were talking about the study you did on Corriere della Sera and the different kind of articles that aroused a particular reaction from the public, you mentioned that, the public reacted really aggressively to articles who tried to humanize the migrants. So article proposing single stories. And they also reacted in a bad way with infographics. And I really missed, but maybe I was distracted, I missed which kind of content they kind of welcomed without this particularly aggressive reaction. I mean, which kind of articles were mostly accepted?
multimedia articles. So where, let's say very, more plain articles where they were just, this giving a description of what was happening and maybe providing multimedia content to support the news, so videos or images, but was something like that, that was appearing more like impartial or to the readers. And the videos where I get the content where they got very low criticism. We believe that it's because, when you can see something, it's more difficult to say that it's not happening, that it's not true. And so, that was our explanation. So something like, seeing is believing. But there were the kind of articles that were, getting a more, positive debate. Generating a positive debate.
Thank you. We have another question. How does the social network deal with virus corona in terms of spreading news, especially fake news?
I don't understand the question.
I mean, maybe they want to ask how social networks deal with the coronavirus, especially with regards to spreading fake news.
So what they're doing to
what's the role? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
Mohammed?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think what's the role of the fake news for the corona now, COVID-19? Because now the new media, a lot of source for news now. I think on the wallet, when you listen the news, you have confusion or means you understand what I mean now for question. I think there is no law or there is no control for the news now. How to deal about it?
So I don't know if I'm getting your question right. Social media platforms are now trying, so some of them are providing links to reliable content or to the official news sources. So for example, to the World Health Organization or to the national institutions, health institutions, to provide users, with reliable information. Twitter is labeling some of content which can be misleading. Of course, these kind of solutions have the drawback that you have, to decide what can be, reliable, what's unreliable, and to provide this kind of label, which is pretty also difficult, especially when you have lots of uncertainty that we have during now with the pandemic. So it's and on the other side, what also platforms are doing and what we are trying to do with them is that they are, providing access to data, because for us it's pretty, important to have access to the data, so that we can, as researchers, study how news are spreading, what are the patterns, what are the, also the evolution, for example, of particular communities or topics over time. And so now what we are doing, and Facebook already, opened access to researchers last year. So we are affiliated in some programs from Facebook that allow access to their data, and this is what we are doing now. So I guess that it's a a very important aspect, and I guess that the COVID-19 pandemic made this pretty clear. So the fact that there is a need of direct collaboration between the platforms and researchers to give researchers access to the data and to let us understand what's going on. On the other side, so this, I don't believe that, putting labels on content and labeling content on platforms can be our, final solution to deal with this issue. I hope that I answered your question.
Thank you. Sorry, because my problem in internet, and now we come back again.
Don't worry.
Okay, we cut
Thank you.
5 minutes. I think. Okay.
Fabiana, I have a couple of very short questions.
Yes, if
No, please.
you don't mind, please. I would like to thank Fabiana for this useful and very interesting presentation. My problem with the scientific dealing with misinformation is the following, is that we deal with misinformation as a phenomenon that is objectively there, and many people deal with it as if it emerged somehow by itself. So we just look into the effects of this problem and the dimensions and how to counter the problem and find solutions. And I am just interested to know from Fabiana if from the research she and her colleagues have done so far, have you found out who mostly the misinformers are? Are they mostly government sources? Are they business people? Are they NGOs? Are they some social groups? I mean, you can't just deal with misinformation without, having an idea about the cause of this misinformation and hate speech as well. I mean, all these problems have authors who cause them. So we just can't just look into the problem from the last point and see the hate speech, the misinformation, and then we analyze objectively, the problem without knowing who caused it. So are the journalists, the professional journalists responsible for this mainly, or did you check on that in the research or not? This is my question.
I mean, you're right, but it really depends on the context and on the countries, because of course it's very difficult. It also depends on the topic, and it also depends on the definition of misinformation that we can have, which is another important issue, because of course you know, for example, we can say that we had lots of misinformation in Italy on COVID-19, also from you know, official newspapers, and sometimes it just, you know, especially when you have lots of, as I said, lots of uncertainty around certain topics, this is pretty the case. And then you can have also different levels of misinformation. You can have propaganda and so, for example, in some specific countries, this can be, you know, pretty an issue. We didn't focus on the source of misinformation. It's not so, you know, so easy to rebuild, let's say, the cycle of the fake news. They, especially quantitatively, I would say. So it's pretty difficult, because you have. So you would like to rebuild the flow, so how it started and how it changed and evolved over time. But I also want to say that, for example, in the case of COVID-19 and in Italy, what we observed looking at the data, and when I talk about, you know, in our studies, I talk about the misinformation or unreliable information. Usually that's information that has been labeled as that from independent organizations, so not from us. But what we observed is that looking at the data was that the amount of misinformation was in the end always below the 5% of the content on social media. So, you know, sometimes it's just also, that's also why it's a bigger issue, and you are right, and it's also an issue in general of, you know, the business model, the new business model of also news media online, and how we have to deal with this. So you know, I also, and I guess that the projects that I was, you know, presenting in the end are showing this, that we don't have only, you know, to just focus on misinformation, just like, you know, false information or fake news are the real problem, because maybe we lose the bigger picture, which is how the news media, for example, system is working, and if this business model that they have to, you know, to follow and to deal with is also having, you know, an impact in the quality of the information available to the readers. And of course, then there is the other issue that, of course, misinformation is just not, you know, a problem confined to social media or to the internet, because that's not the way. But of course, I am talking about that because I study that particular side of the, you know, of the problem, and also because we have lots of data, so it's easy to study the phenomenon there. But it's also, you know, the other issue is that there is lots of sometimes there is this misperception of misinformation as a problem which is only, you know, affecting the online environment, which is not really the case.
Again, I have a couple of short questions. First one, about the 24-hour time frame you mentioning between when news come out and when fake news related.
Yeah.
This is not topic sensitive. I mean, it's the same time frame for news of any kind.
Yeah, in that particular data set, we didn't have a topic. Of course, it's a maximum. Okay, so it's, you know, it's confined to 24 hours. It can be less. Okay. That's also why we were trying, you know, to find a way just to adjust the communication on topics instead of using, you know, direct corrective measures like debunking, because the time is very short. So you don't have, most of the times, you don't have the time and the human resources to do debunking activities for all the unreliable information which can be out there. And so the idea was that we can try to do something to prevent. Yeah.
Second question, you were saying something about people trusting what they see more than what they read, which is a big issue for media theory in an increasingly visual environment. We know that. The question is if you have made any difference between videos and still images, video and picture, or you were talking about...
Videos were the best ones in terms of trust. So it's it's the case. So in our data, every time there was a video, it was the kind of content that got the less criticism. So Corriere was never criticized when they were publishing videos on migration.
More than pictures, therefore.
More than pictures, yes.
There's a question from Abdallah, another one. He says, you mentioned only 4 languages for automatic detection for fake news. Is there any other language, and will Arabic be one of them?
No, I mean that maybe there is a misunderstanding, because here we had a detection for hate speech, not for fake news. But no, they are the 4 languages of the project. This is, I guess, also a limit of the fact that European projects have usually European partners, and so the languages really depends on the partners.
Any other question?
Okay, unfortunately, people are coming because originally the lecture was expected at 11. As usual, the coordinator is the one we have to blame. You have to blame for this. I have to apologize to Fabiana, but was well.
Don't worry. Anyway, they have the recording, so I guess that if they are interested.
Remember that they do not change the time in Libya. So I don't know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, we have some work to do after a coffee break, and we can thank Fabiana for her beautiful speech. And ok, grazie mille.
Also, my regards to Viana.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Grazie, Serena.
Ok, ciao Fabiana, grazie mille.
Ciao, grazie.
We will have the meetup in 20 minutes, so we can have a coffee and get back here.